The Reform UK leader Nigel Farage is set to make a speech in a couple of hours, announcing plans for the mass deportation of hundreds of thousands of illegal immigrants to this country, should he win the next election and become Prime Minister.
But this marks an early U-turn in policy, having dismissed the idea during a GB News interview just last September. Well, joining us now is Reform UK's Head of Department of Government Efficiency, Zia Yusuf. Good morning to you. Thanks for coming in. Good morning. Let's start off with that then, in that case. Politically impossible to do this. It's not the ambition, simply won't be able to do it. That's a big U-turn then.
Well, what we've seen is this country now in what is a national emergency, a national security emergency. So the first thing that's changed is there's another 50,000 people have crossed the Channel illegally since Keir Starmer took power. That is a record. It brings the number in total to 180,000 over the last 8.5 years. That's more people than stormed the beaches of D-Day, by the way, during World War II. The other really important point to make is we now have evidence that this works from the United States. Whatever people watching this programme think of President Trump, President Trump has cut illegal border crossings from Mexico by 97% by embarking on a mass deportation programme. That is why we think the country has no choice but to do this. Otherwise, we have no borders. We have no borders, we have no sovereignty, we don't have a country.
Mr Farage teed up the speech he's going to be making in an hour or two in an interview with the Times newspaper, a very extensive interview with the Times paper. And the journalist put the question to him. He was asked about the issue of returning migrants to despotic regimes where torture and extrajudicial executions are commonplace. And in effect, Mr Farage shrugged and said, well, that's not my problem. Your thoughts on that?
As Prime Minister of the country, Nigel wins the next general election, he's made clear his priority will be the British people. The human rights of British people will take precedence. The rights of mums who have been protesting across the country, including in Epping, out of fear for their daughters, that will take priority. For too long in this country, British people's human rights, their interests, their hopes, their dreams have been subordinated and deprioritised relative to those of foreign citizens. Nigel makes no apologies for saying he's going to put the interests of the British people first.
What about our international obligations, though, which we do have?
Nigel's obligation, if he's Prime Minister, is to the British people. Again, we make no apologies for this. And by the way, you know, this notion that Britain basically can't have a border, that we just have to accept hundreds of thousands of fighting-age males turning up on our beaches without invitation and then being put up at British taxpayers' expense. I think if you speak to people across the country, they are sick and tired of being told that, quote-unquote, international obligations mean that we can't have borders.
But if
we don't have borders, we don't have a country.
There will be consequences, won't there, though, internationally, if we ignore the obligations that are agreed with other countries as to how immigration is dealt with.
The consequence will be that we actually have sovereignty as a country. The consequence will be that people can wake up in the morning knowing that their taxpayers' money is not being spent on putting people up in hotels who have no respect for our laws.
And you don't think, if this were to come to pass, that the news that may filter back to this country that someone who'd been deported, to say, back to Afghanistan and the Taliban had been chucked off the roof of a building, you don't think that wouldn't possibly change the public mood?
I think we've got to be really clear about what our priority is, right? We're not going to intentionally, Nigel's not going to intentionally make that happen. But look, unfortunately, there are despotic regimes in the world. As Nigel said very clearly in that interview, and we make no apologies for this, the British Prime Minister cannot be held responsible for the actions of despotic regimes all over the world. What he is responsible for, I'm going to be really clear about this, about, for example, the women who have been victims of sexual offences as a result of people who are in this country illegally, the children who have been murdered as a result of people who are in this country illegally. And then, by the way, I can give you endless examples of such people, murderers, rapists, who are in this country illegally, who then resist their deportation at the hands of these international courts as a result of things like the ECHR. The only way we're going to solve this problem is by having a total legislative reset.
That information, though, on crimes isn't actually available, though, is it? But on the point of sort of sending
which information is
people...
available?
Because the statistics on actually who commits these crimes is my point.
Well, there is. So if you look, for example, Afghan nationals, and this is according to official government data, Afghan nationals are 22 times more likely to commit sex offences, to be convicted of a sex offence, than native British people. Now, that's not a subjective aspersion. That's not a subjective aspersion. That is government data.
That's a disputed figure, though, isn't it?
And to the degree that was then disputed, there was then a fact checked on that dispute. That is an accurate number. The fact is we have had for too long now decades of governments who have been willing to prioritise the rights of foreign citizens over our own. And yes, and that's why Nigel said, when he's Prime Minister, he cannot be held accountable for the actions of despotic regimes across the world. He will be held accountable and should be held accountable for the safety and the interests of British people.
What about the internment camps that he was talking about? He was saying that within 18 months of becoming Prime Minister, enough space would be made available in these camps for up to at least 24,000 people. And he said that they would all be on their way home within a month. How would those camps operate? And what about people living locally? How do you expect people, say, in Lincolnshire to respond to the news that there are going to be 12,000 illegal immigrants parked in a camp just down the road from them?
Well, we're talking about a country with 100,000 square miles. You're going to need about a third of a square mile to house that number of detainees in these detention camps. And we can take inspiration again from what's happened in America, where 3,000 beds were built in Florida in the space of 8 days. I want to say that again, 3,000 beds in a detention facility.
Similar to the Nightingale hospitals here.
In 8 days, yeah, so it can be done extremely quickly. You know, the notion that these things cannot be done is for the birds. The only reason it is never done is because you have witless, gutless politicians without the political courage to actually make things happen.
Isn't it? Because the cost of all of this, you're suggesting, is £10 billion. So where does that money come from?
Britain spends over £7 billion, at least £7 billion, that's from official government figures, on illegal migration and asylum every year as things stand. That's £35 billion over the 5 years we're talking about. So actually, by doing this, within the first term of a reform government, £7 billion of taxpayer money will be saved. By the end of 10 years, it's £42 billion, and over the next few decades, it will be hundreds of billions of pounds. If we don't deport these people, they get indefinite leave to remain, they stay on welfare, and then they get state pension.
Can we go back to the question of deportation? All right, let's set aside whether or not they would be sent back to the countries of origin, because many of those countries of origin would refuse to have them, or would actually not accept that they came from that country, because many of them destroy their papers when
which
they
will be made illegal.
So where would you send them? If let's say you have a man who you believe to be an Afghan refugee, but Afghanistan refuses to take him back, where does he go?
OK, so let's cover a few different points off. Number one, in that £10 billion gross cost that we've laid out, there's a £2 billion budget for financial incentives, 2 countries to take back their people. Number two, Afghanistan. There's this misinformation out there that the Taliban will never take people back. Germany has already begun a deportation programme to Afghanistan via Qatar. Not only can it be done, it has been done, it is being done. That even this awful Labour government have done a returns agreement with Iraq. So the only thing that is lacking is a political will to do this. And then I want to say this too. If the carrot doesn't work, if they don't accept the money to take these people back and identify their illegal migrants, then we will have to use the stick. So, yes, why are we issuing visas on a discretionary basis to these countries? And then if that doesn't work, we'll use sanctions.
And is Mr Farage seriously suggesting rethinking the Rwanda project?
Well, we are going to have third countries available for countries that the Home Secretary has not designated as safe. We do accept there will be some countries potentially or some situations where that will need to happen. So, yes, in that situation, we will have third countries where we resettle people. But what's completely different is that there's a total legal reset here. One of the reasons why Rwanda failed is because the Tories were booted out for being so awful by the electorate. But also, they didn't leave the ECHR, so the courts just blocked it. Not only are we leaving the ECHR, we're replacing the Human Rights Act with a British Bill of Rights, which will leave no branch available for judges, activist judges, to stop deportation.
And was Mr Farage serious about sending people, if you can't find a third country to take them and their original country won't take them back, of taking them to Ascension Island in the South Atlantic?
Yes.
That's a real proposition.
Yes.
Because it's almost impossible to land on Ascension Island.
It's not impossible to land, it's an RF base.
Yes, but it's been described as a very, very difficult place to land.
There are plenty of flights that land there all the time. There's around 800 to 1,000 inhabitants at any given point. And by the way, it was actually used as an emergency space shuttle landing point at one point.
All right. And what happens to them when they get to Ascension Island?
Well, then we will have again detention centres, and if necessary, we will resettle them there.
So the criticism is that, you've come up with all these plans and the action that you're going to take, but actually, you won't be able to see these through, that it won't actually be physically possible to be able to carry all this out.
Again, this is for the birds. President Obama, this might surprise people, President Obama deported 3 million people. He deported 3 million people across his 2 terms as president. There is absolutely historical precedent for doing this, and that is what reform will do.
OK, well, the speech is being made at, I think, 10:30 this morning. We will be discussing it and dissecting it at this time tomorrow morning.
Thanks for coming in. Just to say, the Minister for Border Security, Angela Eagle, has said this government has saved £1 billion in asylum accommodation costs and increased removals of those with no right to be here, bringing forward new laws to make it easier to deport sex offenders, which both Reform UK and the Tories voted against.
All right, thank you for joining us this morning.